Hey, everybody out there in podcast land, I hope you are doing well. It is time for the Fortress of Rock, episode 137 here on Friday, March the 29th, 2024. As always, glad, ecstatic, happy beyond belief to have you aboard for this weekly rock and roll extravaganza. I am your host, the Maestro Kevin Crane. And as always, we start off each and every Friday night on the Fortress of Rock with news of the world. Our tribute to the late, great Freddie Mercury and his band Queen. Start off with some tour news. Now, not earth shattering, groundbreaking tour news like we've had recently. Everything's settling down now. All the summer tours, for the most part, have been set in stone. But still, a few little treks across the U.S. Not big time again, but minor league, smaller shows, tours to discuss. Starting off with the Stray Cats. You guys know I have been more into the Stray Cats lately, especially because last year Brian Setzer's great, awesome solo album, The Devil Always Collects, one of my favorite albums of last year. So the Stray Cats, the original trio, back together again, first time touring, I believe, the U.S. in 5 years. July and August, late summer tour, just announced. 15 dates in the U.S. So if you are fortunate enough to have a chance to see the Stray Cats do that strut, go out and check out Brian Setzer and the boys. Pat Benatar, of course, to me, along with Ann Wilson, those are the two greatest female voices in rock history. Pat Benatar and her husband, Neil Giraldo, I have my issues with him. I think he's kind of pushed himself into the limelight with his wife. There's something weird with that dynamic. I'm sorry. Being the cynic that I am, some people would say, oh, it's just true love. It's a really, really equal partnership. No, it's not. Pat Benatar is the star. Why does Neil Giraldo think he gets to push his name up there with hers now? Not saying he's not a good guitarist. He's a very, very good guitarist. And of course, he engineers and produces all of her music. Has done it for decades and decades, but I still think there's something a little bit off with this relationship, where it's always got to be Pat Benatar and Neil Giraldo. No, it's Pat Benatar. Neil Giraldo needs to step back and give his wife credit for what she's done with that fantastic, ridiculous, awesome voice. And stop acting like, well, I've done just as much as she has. Stop it. No, you haven't. Step back, Neil. Let your wife take her due credit. Sorry, I've always just been bitter about that with Neil Giraldo. I've never understood why he gets to keep pushing himself as an equal to Pat Benatar. But the Fantastic Tour is what they're calling it, with Benatar and Giraldo. Will be running from May through August of 2024, 21 U.S. dates. Then, of course, we know AC/DC still have not heard anything, any rumors any speculation about Brian Johnson and Angus Young and the boys coming over to the U.S. Right now, 2024 European tour scheduled. That's it. They have announced the opening act for this tour. Of course, this is the Power Up tour. The last studio album, they never really got to put together a proper tour for it, so this is the Power Up tour. The Pretty Reckless will be opening on the European leg of the 2024 tour. Why do I say leg? Because I still hope that it's not just a European tour, that they will come to North America at some point late 2024 or summer of 2025. So we've got this theme going. You notice this? We have this theme about awesome, fantastic women in rock and roll. We've talked about Pat Benatar, now the Pretty Reckless. Let's move on to the constant, non-stop drama that is Skid Row. And you're going, what's that got to do with women in rock and roll? Give me a minute. Now we know Sebastian Bach has got new music coming out. We talked about it last week. 2 singles out from his upcoming new solo album, Child Within the Man. Skid Row has just been struggling ever since they split with Sebastian Bach to find that lead man, that lead voice, that lead person. And we know their current lead singer, Eric Grönwall, has had a lot of health issues. Now, the last Skid Row album with Eric Grönwall, The Gang's All Here, was fantastic. I would say The Gang's All Here, best Skid Row album since Subhuman Race. But unfortunately, Eric Grönwall just can't continue fronting Skid Row with these health issues. So he has had to bow out permanently as lead singer of Skid Row. So that means now we are 4 singers in with Skid Row since Sebastian Bach parted ways with Rachel Bolan, Snake Sabo, and the boys. Again, Maestro, why do you think this has anything to do with women in rock and roll? Because there were still 4 shows left on the U.S. tour. And Eric Grönwall cannot do them, cannot get through these last 4 shows. And again, the man has been through hell when it comes to his health. So you cannot hold it against him if he had to just bring a complete and total stop to touring. Who will fill in? Because these shows are not being canceled. Skid Row will play these last 4 shows on their U.S. tour in 2024. Those of you who know Hailstorm, you sure as hell know Lizzie Hale, the lead singer for Hailstorm. She will take over for the final 4 shows on Skid Row's 2024 U.S. tour. She has covered Slave to the Grind. She knows the catalog. If you get a chance, if you can sneak into one of these 4 shows, do it. If I could, if it was near me, I would. This would be an intriguing twist on Skid Row, having Lizzie Hale singing some of these classic songs. Then we have The Who. I have had my issues with bands. Leonard Skinner comes to mind, and of course, The Who. Bands that keep saying, well, we're calling it quits. We're going out on our farewell tour. Motley Crue. Of course, how can we forget the contract signed in their own blood where Motley Crue said, we will never tour again. We're done. And then, of course, they backed out on that. So a promise in rock and roll, not worth the paper that it's written on. The contract is worthless when they say, this is it. This is all we're going to do. We're done. Calling it quits forever. More often than not, they come back a few years later because they need more money from us. And of course, we know The Who have done this over and over and over again. I say at least 2 farewell tours, if not more, but at least 2 farewell tours for The Who so far. And now Pete Townsend, he comes out and admits it. And again, you wonder why I'm so cynical. Because they don't care about us. They only care about themselves and their bank accounts and their egos. They lie all the time. This is why you have to be careful with how you spend your money on their music, and especially how you spend your music going to see their concerts. You have to go in knowing they're lying to you. They could be using pre-recorded backing tracks, or in this case with The Who, lying once again about farewell tours. So Pete Townsend has said that he does see The Who going out, at least him and Roger Daltrey. Obviously, that's all that's left of The Who. And that is the core 2 members, not trying to disparage Keith Moon or John Entwistle, but they will go out, according to Pete Townsend, on a final farewell tour. You can say it's refreshing. I will say I told you so. As Pete Townsend admits, they would do it for the money. So again, you're probably a better person than me. And you go, oh, well, I just want to hear those songs again. I want to hear Won't Get Fooled again and Baba O'Reilly and Who Are You? I want to hear those all again. So what do I care? Let me shell out $150 for a ticket. Minimum. Guaranteed that'll be the minimum price for a decent seat. I can't do it. I'm getting to the point now where with the ticket prices skyrocketing and the bands complaining, and I understand Spotify does not give them a fair share of what they should get when it comes to the music that's getting played on that streaming service. But I'm getting tired of the fans always having to bear the burden. Mentioned the Stray Cats earlier. Kind of wanted to see them. Noticed that there was a show close to me, about an hour away, place I've been before. Checked out ticket prices to sit in the last row for the Stray Cats, who honestly, let's be honest, have not been relevant in well over 30 years. To sit in the last row would have cost me between $85 and $90 in a medium-sized venue. That's ridiculous. And I've already done my ranting and raving about Hootie and the Blowfish and Collective Soul, one of the first concerts announced for summer of 2024. Those prices were ridiculous. Now, I am going to see Collective Soul separately. Was able to pull that off for a good price. But a lot of these concerts are just going ridiculous with the prices. Live Nation and Ticketmaster, of course, want to tell us, oh, look, we're transparent now. All in pricing, only in their venues. The venues they own. Live Nation owns a lot of concert venues across the country. So you get this all in pricing only at their venues. Otherwise, you'll note, be careful of it. You'll note that you will look at the ticket price and it will say plus fees. And then we get into the whole vicious cycle again where it's going to be $20 more than what they're telling you. Okay, let's get off of touring news. Let's get off of me ranting about ticket prices. Let's talk about movies. Rock and roll movies. Universal has got a Prince-inspired film coming with noted director-producer Ryan Coogler. Of course, this will be inspired by his music. So I don't know, does that mean it's probably going to be more like a Rocket Man type of movie? We've talked recently here about Bon Scott. There's a movie coming about his life. And of course, we have discussed the fact that these movies are now fertile ground, just like superhero movies were fertile ground 20 years ago. It was an untapped source that now Hollywood has found and they're going nutsy cuckoo crazy for. Of course, most recently, the Bob Marley biopic closing in on $100 million domestically. So now, of course, let's do a Prince-inspired movie. The tricky thing with that is we've already got Purple Rain, which was a great, great movie. One of the all-time great rock and roll movies. So what are you going to do, Universal, with a Prince-inspired film? These don't always work. And again, I know right now it's a hot commodity, but look back at Across the Universe, inspired, quote unquote, by the music of the Beatles. Didn't do all that great. Now, we've had other movies. Yesterday did very well. Another movie inspired by the music of the Beatles. So, could be a hit, could be a miss. We shall see. Ryan Coogler, though, is a big name right now in Hollywood, so to get his backing means at least they'll put some money behind it. Now, if you have Disney Plus coming on May the 24th, arguably, the greatest American rock and roll band of all time. And of course, we have discussed this in the past, always up for debate. You throw Van Halen in the mix, you throw Aerosmith in there, but the Beach Boys. And it looks like that's going to be the title of this documentary, The Beach Boys. Will debut May the 24th on Disney Plus. And of course, we know there has been no shortage of drama behind the scenes when it comes to the Beach Boys. Should be a fascinating, fascinating documentary. Now, I always look at Billboard. I've talked about Billboard. I talk about them almost every week, for good, for bad, for better, for worse. I grew up with America's Top 40 based on the Billboard charts. So when it comes to old Billboard stuff, I do pay attention. Then they kind of screwed things up in the mid 90s and they switched to SoundScan. And we'll talk more about this, believe it or not, in segment 3. I've got a story that ties into this. So the charts, music sales, who do you trust now? What can you trust? With streaming, we just alluded to the fact that artists still aren't happy with what they're getting paid from streaming services. So, how do you judge music sales now? Well, the numbers are out for 2023. And again, you believe who you want to believe when it comes to this, but recorded music sales in the final tally for 2023 are up 8%. Again, numbers can be fudged here because they're counting, my understanding is they're counting subscriptions to services like Spotify and Apple, the premium subscriptions. That money counts towards recorded music sales. So I don't know how I feel about that. But again, I like to see positive numbers because that means people will be encouraged and they will still push for new music. They will push for artists to get new music out there, hopefully, maybe. So again, music sales in the US up 8% in 2023. Vinyl, again, making huge gains. Vinyl revenue is up 10% as of the end of 2023. CD revenue up 11%. Now, vinyl represents 71% of all physical music sales revenue. But we know those of us of a certain age group know things have turned 180 degrees around because vinyl costs more now than CDs. You go back to the beginnings of CDs in the late 80s, early 90s. Vinyl was cheaper. So it only stands to reason that vinyl would represent a greater percentage of revenue because now vinyl is more expensive. Unit sales is what we've got to look at here. Unit sales is going to be the most important thing. And it's much closer than the revenue. Vinyl, 43 million units sold in 2023. CDs, 37 million. Yes, vinyl still outsold CDs, but it wasn't nearly as big of a gap with units sold as with dollars, with revenue generated. And again, because They're overcharging you beyond belief for vinyl now. You guys remember Layla? Not the song, of course, we all know the song, but remember the album? Derek and the Dominoes? Remember the iconic cover for that album? Patty Boyd, of course, great story, intriguing story, behind the scenes rock and roll story of how she was a muse. She was the wife to both Eric Clapton and George Harrison. She was one of those women that drew men in the rock and roll scene. So she at one time was married again to both Eric Clapton and George Harrison. She got, of course, a hold of the physical copy of that painting that was the cover for Derek and the Dominoes' Layla. She recently sold it for $2.5 million. You guys take that and run with it. I will not comment. Last time I checked, Eric Clapton was still alive and kicking. So somehow Patty Boyd got this portrait and flipped it for $2.5 million. We've been talking a lot here over the last few weeks about the Black Crowes. Brand new album, Happiness Bastards. Phenomenal new album. Of course, if you look back a couple decades, you'll remember Live at the Greek. The Black Crowes collaborating with Jimmy Page of Led Zeppelin. Now, the interesting thing about this collaboration was this was first when people could burn CDs. And I remember this was probably the first album that I ever bought where I had the CD burned. And I actually think I had to order it and have somebody burn it for me. But contractually at the time, the Black Crowes could not release their songs. They had a strict contract, could not release their songs in collaboration with anybody else. It had to be through one label, one channel, and one channel only. So this live collaboration with Jimmy Page, even though the concerts featured Led Zeppelin songs and Black Crowes songs with Jimmy Page playing guitar, we have never heard the Black Crowes with Jimmy Page doing Black Crowes songs. It was all Led Zeppelin stuff. Well, now finally that agreement has expired. It sounds like we're getting a box set possibly here in the near future of this Live at the Greek collaboration where we will get both the Zeppelin stuff we've heard previously and Jimmy Page playing on some of the Black Crowes' biggest hits. And unfortunately, to end on a down note, thoughts and prayers to the 133 people killed in Russia in a terrorist attack. ISIS has claimed responsibility at a concert. God, I hate hearing that. At a concert for a group called Picnic outside of Moscow at Crocus City Hall. Of course, concerts ripe for this kind of ridiculous, nasty, inhumane activity because it's a mass gathering. But even though it's in Russia, we wish our best. Thoughts and prayers. Thank you so much for tuning in to the Fortress of Rock podcast with me, the Maestro, Kevin Crane. Of course, that was segment 1, The News of the World, our tribute to Freddie Mercury and Queen, where we look back at the past week in rock and roll and all the news and all the controversies that you deserve to know about. Next up is the heart of the show, the meat and potatoes breakdown, where we are going to review all the new songs, all the new albums, all the new concert tours, the shows that I've seen personally. Stay tuned for that. Of course, we're now available on Spotify, Anchor, Apple, Stitcher, Castbox, Google, Pocket Cast, and Radio Public, wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. Hang out, kids. We'll be right back. All right, everybody, welcome back to the Fortress of Rock, episode 137 here on March the 29th, 2024. I am your host, the Maestro, Kevin Crane. Of course, again, feel bad leaving you at the end of segment 1 on such a downer note with a terrorist attack on a concert in Russia on March the 22nd. The world we live in sucks. It really does. A lot of the time. And that's why we do this podcast, is because rock and roll is supposed to be the one thing among few other things that give us hope, that give us joy. And even within the confines of rock and roll, you guys know we talk about it every week. There's still things about the people involved, the companies involved, the venues, the ticket brokers that suck. Another thing that sucks that I've alluded to over the past month or so is that the format here could be changing soon. Not big changes, nothing really that you'll notice. We're looking at going nonstop. We're looking at getting rid of the awkward breaks between segments, but I do like how we've structured this podcast with these clean breaks between news and reviews and a look back and a look forward. But Spotify has been gracious through the last couple years in that they have let us not only put our podcast through them as our host platform, but also let us record through them. But now they're taking that part of it away. They've given us an option. So I have to look into that, and we'll see if that will work for us or we have to move on to something else. But it should not affect in any great way how you get the Fortress of Rock every Friday night. Again, probably most likely going to end up going with a nonstop format without segment breaks. But as I mentioned, this is Breakdown, segment 2, new music. This is where we review new music from all the classic artists, the classic bands that we love, still putting out new music, some of it good, some of it not so good. Let's start off with our album review of the week. I'm going to talk for a couple minutes before we get into the review itself, though, because let's talk about Creed. I was never a big fan of Creed. They sounded like a knockoff of Pearl Jam to me. I have some of their albums. They're okay. I don't pull them out and listen to them all that often. And I've always mentioned to you guys that, like my buddy says about Nirvana, my best friend, will always tell me, not in the most politically correct terms, but he will say, I'm glad that we saw the end of Nirvana. I'm going to put it that way, like we did, because we got the Foo Fighters. And of course, in terms of music, I agree with him that what we have gotten from the Foo Fighters is much, much better, much more engaging music wise than what I thought was overblown and overrated grunge rock with Nirvana. So, where does that lead us with Creed? I absolutely, as you guys know, adore Alter Bridge. I think Alter Bridge is one of the top rock bands out there right now. And anybody to challenge or try to break up and disintegrate Alter Bridge, you got to fight on your hands with me. And that leads us to the lead singer for Creed, Scott Stapp. Now, those of you who know your music, you're more, here's the thing, more current music to me. I don't want to say newer music. More current music is the last 25 years. And that encompasses bands like Godsmack and Alter Bridge and Creed. Alter Bridge is 3/4 of Creed with a much better, more talented lead singer in Miles Kennedy. Now, Scott Stapp, lead singer of Creed, has had issues in the past: substance abuse, mental health issues. Now, the last time Creed got back together, roughly 15 years ago, Scott Stapp didn't like the fact that Mark Tremonti, lead guitarist, told him bluntly, this is not a permanent reunion. I am not breaking up Alter Bridge for Creed. This is kind of a one-off deal. And then Scott Stapp went off again, had issues. So Creed is back together again, going out on tour this summer 2024. I have not heard anything about new Creed music. I'm going to assume, because I trust Mark Tremonti, that he is not breaking up Alter Bridge because he knows a good thing when he's got it. This is just a one-off, again, give the people what they want type of deal for the Creed fans. I want Alter Bridge, just like I want the Foo Fighters. I don't need Nirvana, and I really don't need Creed. I want the better of the two options in both cases. But now we have a third option, or a fourth, depending on if you want to throw Miles Kennedy's fantastic solo work into the mix. And by the way, something I just discovered a few days ago, the Mayfield 4. If you're a fan of Miles Kennedy, I did not realize he started off with a band called the Mayfield 4, who actually have 2 albums out there from back in the 90s. So if you're a fan like me of Miles Kennedy and Alter Bridge, go on Spotify, listen to the Mayfield 4 to get a sense of what was coming with an early Miles Kennedy. Fascinating stuff. So anyway, present day. Scott Stapp, clean and sober, hopefully got his head wrapped around in the right direction, knows that Alter Bridge is not going away. Mark Tremonti is not breaking up Alter Bridge and not leaving his band Tremonti to bring Creed back other than this one-off summer 2024 tour. So Scott Stapp, though, as a solo artist, has put out his latest solo work. That is Higher Power. So that is our featured album review of the week, 10 tracks. We've discussed one or two of them here on the Fortress of Rock. So let's get into it. Start off with track 1, which is the title track, Higher Power. Decent. Not bad. Pretty solid. It's what I would call standard meat and potatoes rock and roll. It does what it's supposed to do. That's what meat and potatoes rock and roll does. It doesn't let you down. It gives you what you expect, no less, very rarely more. So we get a solid opening song with the title track for Higher Power. And then I have told you guys I love the second song. And this is really the song that made me decide that I needed to review Higher Power. The album is Dead Man's Trigger. Like Higher Power, the song, it is the meat and potatoes rock and roll, but it's better. It's catchier. Easily the best song on the album. This is different from Creed to me, too. And I will say this, most of Higher Power doesn't sound like Creed, for better or for worse. Dead Man's Trigger, much better. Then we get to track 3, When Love Is Not Enough. I would say it's a mid-tempo rocker, but I think it's a little heavier than that, which is a good thing. Solid, decent third song. So, not hating things so far. Pretty good. Pretty good stuff from Scott Stapp so far. And then we get to track 4, What I Deserve. Still good. Now, this is probably the closest song on the entire album to what you would have expected from Creed at this point in time. Now, I have made fun in the past of Scott Stapp because he has a tendency, and we'll talk about John Bon Jovi here in a few minutes as well. The over singing, the over pronunciation. You have to listen to it. Again, I can't do it justice. I can't play the snippets, the tracks for you here. Obviously, copyright violations are involved, but if you listen to Scott Stapp's What I Deserve, or later on, again, we'll talk about Legendary by John Bon Jovi and his crew. If you decide to over enunciate a song, you're not singing. And Scott Stapp falls into this trap. John Bon Jovi falls into this trap. Just sing the song. What keeps you alive? What keeps you alive? That's over enunciating. It's over singing. Just say what keeps you alive. Again, you got to listen to What I Deserve by Scott Stapp or Legendary review coming up in a few minutes to understand what I'm talking about. Now, beyond that flaw in What I Deserve, it's a really, really good song. So, 4 songs in, I am really liking Higher Power. And I came in with low expectations for this because, again, not a Creed fan, not a fan of Scott Stapp. I look at him as a challenger trying to knock my man Miles Kennedy down and break up Alter Bridge. He's like that skeezy girl trying to break up you and your boyfriend. Okay? You women out there, you know what I'm talking about, guys. It's the same thing with, the dude in the leather jacket and the tattoos, not a care in the world, and your girl looks at this dude when you've got the solid job, the solid income, the car, the house, and she's like, "Well, he's a little dangerous. I kind of like that." Stick with the strong, dependable, sturdy. Anyway, tangent over. And pretty much at this point, so is Higher Power, because after track 4, What I Deserve, things start to fall apart. And this is a pattern that we see over and over and over again with a lot of these albums, especially here over the last couple years. Another reference to my friend, my best friend, my brother from another mother. He hates these forced duets, these forced male female duets. Now, he and I do a podcast together, and we also recently reviewed the Black Crowes, Happiness Bastards. And of course, there is a song on Happiness Bastards that features a male female duet. And while I thought it was a very, very sweet, solid song, Wilted Rose, of course, is the song I'm referring to off Happiness Bastards. He doesn't like it. He's like, I can't stand these forced duets. It just seems like a gimmick. It seems like a trick. Just I want to hear the band that I paid the money for or that I'm expecting to hear. And I get that. I do. So obviously he would not be happy here with track 5, If These Walls Could Talk, which is Scott Stapp duetting with Dorothy. Now, Dorothy is Dorothy Martin. And of course, Dorothy Martin from the band Dorothy, who I have no idea who Dorothy is, here with this duet with Scott Stapp, If These Walls Could Talk. Ugh, not very good. Not very good at all. And I don't know if Scott Stapp is trying to be a gentleman, deferring to his guest star singer, but he lets Dorothy basically take over the song, and she has a tendency to oversing. This is just subpar, cheesy, melodramatic, typical angsty, grunge era stuff. It's just not my cup of tea. Not very good. Then we get to track 6, Black Butterfly, where again, Scott Stapp over enunciates things. Fly, fly, black butterfly. Stop it. Oh my God. Stop it with this stuff. He ruins what otherwise could have been a phenomenal song, a phenomenal, solid, straight ahead rock song. Still good, but could have been great. Quicksand, track 7. Not terrible. Pretty much standard again. Kind of like the track Higher Power. Straight ahead meat and potatoes, rock and roll. You're not getting anything groundbreaking with the lyrics. I'm sinking in quicksand. Need the hand of love to pull me out. I'm paraphrasing, but I'm pretty close. Not great, not bad. But things again after we got through the first handful of tracks are deteriorating. Track 8 is You're Not Alone. Again, same as track 7, Quicksand. Pretty much standard rocker. A little bit more mid-tempo here. But nobody's ever going to accuse Scott Stapp of being Shakespeare with some of these lyrics. And I'm sure he had help writing a lot of the stuff on this album. So maybe I shouldn't be criticizing him exclusively outside of his over-singing on What I Deserve and Black Butterfly. But I understand the trials and the tribulations he's gone through in his life. And so naturally, a lot of this music is going to try to be more uplifting, trying to guide people through and say, you can get through tough times. Don't listen to the naysayers. Don't listen to the negativity. So I appreciate the positivity of his message for the most part throughout this album. But it would just be appreciated if you could do it in a less cookie cutter way. And then the last two songs just ruin what could have been a great album. Track 9, Dancing in the Rain, and track 10, Weight of the World. Gonna kind of talk about these two together because they're both those melodramatic types of songs. Again, trying to convey somewhat positive messages, but just they do it in such a humdrum, droning, generic way, a melodramatic way that they never get their message across. Because if you're putting your audience to sleep, the message isn't going to get through. And that's what makes great music, is if you can get the message across in a unique, powerful way with great guitars, great vocals, great songwriting and lyrics, that's when you connect with your audience. So yes, as you can tell, the second half of the album, again, the pattern that seems to have been established here over the last few years with a lot of these acts, a lot of these bands and their albums. They set you up with 2 or 3, maybe 4 good songs, and then things fall apart. And unfortunately, that is, for the most case, what we get with Scott Stapp's Higher Power. Now, I've heard worse over the last couple years. Obviously, heard much better. I will give Higher Power the bare minimum of recommendations if you like Creed. If you're into the emo bands from the last 20, 25 years, the harder rock, Disturbed, and all that kind of stuff that I don't really like all that much, maybe you'll tolerate this. Maybe you'll find it enjoyable. Me coming from my 70s and 80s perspective, there's just barely enough on this that I like, where I would say maybe give it a shot. But if you hate it, don't blame me. So now I referred to a couple times during my review of Scott Stapp's Higher Power, I referred to John Bon Jovi. And yes, I know you guys are tired of me complaining about that Bon Jovi concert from a couple years ago. And of course, the stories come out now that he had vocal cord issues, had to have surgery. I still am extremely upset hearing that story. Why would you even go out on tour and steal people's money if you knew you couldn't sing? But I'll get beyond that so we can discuss the brand new song from Bon Jovi off their upcoming album, Bon Jovi Forever. And of course, the first single off Forever has a similarly dynamic title, Legendary. I will admit, I have come to dislike John Bon Jovi a lot, not just because of the concert, but over the last 10 to 15 years, I find him to be one of the biggest phonies in rock and roll. Now, I don't dislike him on the level of a Neil Young or a Roger Waters, but John Bon Jovi just seems to be that guy. And we all knew that guy in high school. He was the guy who he played sports but wasn't really good at sports. He was just good looking enough and just had just enough personality and charm. He had the mix of everything you would want, but he wasn't really great at anything. But he was good enough at everything with the sports, the personality. He was just smart enough in class where the teachers liked him. And of course, the girls liked him. And I know one in my high school class who I would single out as this guy. He was the John Bon Jovi of my high school class. And we all had one. And that he wants to glom on to the cooler kids. And he's got just enough going where he can pull it off. John Bon Jovi now somehow good friends with Bruce Springsteen, even though John Bon Jovi honestly doesn't have as much talent in his entire body as Bruce Springsteen has in his pinky finger. And I sometimes have my issues with Bruce Springsteen. But John Bon Jovi came up through the ranks of the 80s hair metal bands, and now I'm much better than that. I'm in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame now. I don't need Richie Sambora anymore. And if you watch the video for the new song Legendary, the two remaining members in Bon Jovi from the classic lineup through the 80s into the 90s, Tico Torres on drums and David Bryan on keyboards, get shoved to the back as John wants his newer guys up closer to him, his support group, to tell him how awesome he is and tell him how much they love him. Why don't they just call this a John Bon Jovi album? Why don't they just get rid of the pretense and stop with Bon Jovi? It's John Bon Jovi and a bunch of background people. I'm sorry. Bon Jovi is not Bon Jovi without Richie Sambora. It's not. And we saw all the turns and the twists creatively. Oh, now we're a country band. And then, of course, they had a huge country hit, and that really stoked the fires of John Bon Jovi's ego, where now he thinks he's an equal to Bruce Springsteen and John Mellencamp, and he thinks he's right up there with the gods of rock and roll. And he's poo-pooing all the bands that he grew up with and he toured with back in the 80s. And so now we get Legendary. And this is what happens when you dismiss all the people that kept you in check musically. The people that told you, no, you shouldn't do that, John. You should do this. This is a better idea. No, no, no. I know better than everybody. This is what happens when Sting goes out on his own. And now he's trying to recreate the Police, a bargain basement Dollar Tree version of the Police. And this is why Mark Knopfler, as much as I love Mark Knopfler, doesn't have the edge with his music that he would have if he had Dire Straits intact. This is why David Lee Roth was never as good without Eddie Van Halen. The group dynamic, the collaboration is key. Now, if you start off as a solo act and you've always been in charge like a John Mellencamp, it's different. And I still think there's a point in even a John Cougar Mellencamp in his career where he needed those guys that he played with back in the 80s. Larry Crane, Mike Wanchik, Kenny Aronoff. He needed that group dynamic, even though they weren't necessarily part of a band per se. You need people to keep you in check. You need people to give you ideas. You need people to rein you in from your excesses. And John Bon Jovi doesn't have it anymore. It's obvious. He does not have anybody anymore to tell him, this is garbage, John. You can do better than this. Because Legendary is something that you or I could have gone into a diner after a night of drinking, grabbing a greasy burger and some fries and a coffee, taken a cocktail napkin and a pen and written better lyrics than this. Whoa, 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 whoa. Now, he's supposed to, obviously, John Bon Jovi, supposed to be referential in this song to legends of rock and roll because he mentions Brown Eyed Girl, of course, Van Morrison, and singing Sweet Caroline, referencing the great Neil Diamond. And he thinks, oh, look at the great songwriting I've put together here. It's generic garbage. It's embarrassing, generic garbage. And some of you out there might love it and might think I'm being harsh on it. I don't care. It's generic garbage. And this is the way, this is the path that John Bon Jovi's been going down for years and years and years now, especially since he got rid of Richie Sambora. And I'm sure Richie Sambora is not faultless in the split between the two. Now, if you've listened to Richie Sambora's solo stuff, he's got a genuine knack, a genuine talent when he puts his mind to it. But I think they need each other. I really think they need each other to create Bon Jovi. Because Legendary is depressingly bad. So now let's wrap up Breakdown with, unfortunately, another, and in this case, personal negative review. I've always told you guys some of the themes that I harp on week after week. One of the ones that I always come back to is the secret band or the secret performer. That group, that band that you saw at a bar or a club when you were younger that never really quite made it. They did okay. They made enough money touring, or maybe they had one hit song, one minor hit album to keep them going. Band like Lily and Axe up here where I'm from comes to mind. For me personally, Roger Clyne and the Peacemakers, who've been out there touring for a couple decades now, just doing enough, just selling enough when it comes to tickets and to physical albums to get by. And then, of course, more recently, a band that opened for Roger Clyne and the Peacemakers, the Black Moods. And I have been singing the praises of the Black Moods for a long, long time here, closing in on a decade. And I've been saying arguably the best new rock and roll band out there. I don't know what I can say now. And I should have known when I saw the bands in town post that the new Black Mood song was coming and it was going to usher in a new era. Oh God, a new era for the Black Moods. Immediately, bells and whistles, alarms going off in my rock and roll head. This sounds like U2. Right before they put out Zooropa and Pop. And I thought, please, just no, it can't be. It can't be. This band cannot be changing their style. They are the one true pure rock and roll band out there right now among the newer groups. Well, unfortunately, I was wrong. The Black Moods put out the new song Heaven about a week ago. And they decided they're going to try to get a little more poppy, a little more, I don't know, techno with their sound. Techno, I guess, is the wrong term. That makes it sound like they're going dance, which is not the case. But a little bit too overproduced, a little bit too over-engineered for my taste. It just comes off as a little too nuanced not in a good way. This is a band that had solid lyrics, always had a nice turn of the phrase, witty lyrics throughout their first 3-4 albums. New as a trio, bass, drums, guitar. Knew what they were doing, had a solid, raw sound, enough hooks to make it work, to make you think back to the best of not only the 80s, but the 90s. Little bit of grunge, little bit of the 80s, And now I don't know what this literally, I have been mulling this review over for a week now since Heaven came out last Friday, the 22nd. And I'm literally, for one of the few times ever, even a week later, still finding the words, trying to find the words to describe this song and how it disappoints me. You would almost have to listen to an old Black Moods song if you listen to the last album, Into the Night, which I praised on this podcast, which was, I believe, my favorite album of the year a couple years back. You listen to anything off of that album, Fire and Gasoline comes to mind. But anything off of that album, even one of the weaker songs like Hollywood, and compare it to this and what they're trying to do here with Heaven. This is just a grave, terrible, awful misfire from the Black Moods. And I'm hoping, I told a friend of mine the other day discussing this, I'm hoping this is kind of like Tattoo with Van Halen and their final album, A Different Kind of Truth, where they just chose the one song to put out there as the lead single that they never should have. Bad advice, bad idea, never should have done it. That's what I'm hoping. Now, there is, again, no word on a full album, and the Black Moods tend to stretch things out for a while, so the fact they've released a new song, honestly, for them doesn't mean anything, unlike Collective Soul, whereas they've got a new album coming out in a month and a half, and they still haven't officially released a single yet, and it's a double album, so go figure that. But the Black Moods do things the exact opposite, where they will release a song every 2 or 3 months, and then we might get a new album in 2025. So again, do not listen to Heaven, because I don't want you to think of the Black Moods like this. If you have not listened to them yet, go back and listen to any of their previous albums. Much, much, much better stuff. I can say, without a doubt, this song, Heaven, even though it wouldn't be the worst song for most other bands, and I'm making it sound like it's the worst recorded song ever. It's not. It's not You Light Up My Life. It's just very disappointing given the past history of the Black Moods. So what I'm saying is, if you have not listened to them before, do not take this song, listen to it, and think this is who the Black Moods are. This is an anomaly, hopefully. And again, this is Tattoo. This is not who the Black Moods are. So unfortunately and ridiculously here on Breakdown, as we end it and get ready to jump into the rock and roll DeLorean with Doc Brown, between Bon Jovi, the Black Moods, and Scott Stapp this week, I would have to actually say, and it's not even close, listen to Scott Stapp's album Higher Power. Stay away from Bon Jovi's Legendary, and stay away from the Black Moods' Heaven. Didn't even get to really talk about the over singing on Bon Jovi, by the way. But again, you have to listen to the song to understand what I'm talking about. The over enunciation, the over pronunciation of words. Scott Stapp does it. John Bon Jovi's doing it. I don't know if it's a symptom, an offshoot of his vocal surgery and how he has to sing now, but I leave it up to you. walk down that road. If you want to, I say stay away. Let's get ready to travel back in time, though. 60 seconds from now, I'll be back with Doc Brown for I Want to Go Back. All right, now that we've looked at the current state of music in our breakdown segment, it is time to climb into the DeLorean and travel back in time to look back at moments in rock and roll history, birthdays, deaths, anniversaries of song and album releases. It is time for I Want to Go Back, our tribute to Eddie Money. Stay tuned. And as always, we're on Spotify, Anchor, Apple, Stitcher, Castbox, Google, Pocket Cast, and Radio Public, anywhere where you listen to your favorite podcasts. All right, everybody, welcome back to the Fortress of Rock, episode 137 here, March the 29th, 2024. I am your gracious and humble host, the Maestro, Kevin Crane. Sitting to my left in the pilot seat is Doc Brown. He has got the rock and roll DeLorean up to 1.21 gigawatts as we go back in time. Segment 3, as always, I Want to Go Back, our tribute to the late, great Eddie Money. Our anniversaries of classic album releases, birthdays, moments in rock and roll history. But first, take care of some business here for you real quick. Our sources. My rock and roll brain is full, overflowing with knowledge, but I need help. The three main sources that I have for segment 1 especially, and here in segment 3. They are ultimateclassicrock.com, thisdayinmusic.com, and the Van Halen News Desk. You know where to find us. You're listening right now, so you found us somewhere, but keep in mind you have choices and you have options. And those options include Spotify, Google, for just a few more days, Radio Public, Pocket Cast, Apple, iHeartRadio, Overcast, Amazon Music, Castbox. Do not forget to check out the Facebook page. You know what happens on the Facebook page. Fun stuff every weekend, not just a link to the latest episode of this podcast, but every Friday night you get your weekend rock project. This weekend, the most important place in the world for all of us is home. You get done with work. Where do you want to go? You want to go home. I know it's not 100%. Some people have terrible home lives. I get it. You don't want to go home. But for most of us, it's home. That place where you can lock the doors, watch what you want, sports, movies, TV, listen to some music, of course, be with your loved ones. So, we are looking for your favorite rock and roll songs, your best rock and roll songs with the word home or house in the title. And then in 2 days, this coming Sunday, of course, every Sunday is New Music Sunday, where we post a video from YouTube, a lyric video, a fully produced video of a new song. Try to get you guys to listen to some new stuff. Maybe you missed out on the podcast this week. Why would you? How dare you? But then jump on Sunday afternoon and at least get a taste of some new music with our New Music Sunday video. So that takes us to anniversaries. Let's start off there. Going back in time, March the 29th of 2017. The funeral for George Michael took place. I have complained and I have said that I don't believe that the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame does a good job anymore when it comes to just get the rock and roll acts in. And I have said Styx, I've said Foreigner, I've said Boston. George Michael, if I was going to put somebody in to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame who was not technically rock and roll, George Michael is one of the artists, one of the performers, one of the singers where I would say, yes, put him in. I always like George Michael and Wham. They have some of the most iconic songs. He has them either solo or with Wham throughout the 80s into the 90s. Again, you got to look at it from two different sides. I'm looking at it from the rock and roll side. He's not rock and roll, therefore, ergo, shouldn't be in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. But with the expanded standards that are now in place, I'm glad. I'm glad George Michael is in. March the 29th, 1986. An iconic song. I don't know where you're going to put it in the annals, the history of music. But Falco's Rock Me Amadeus on this day in 1986 was the number one song in the U.S. March 29th, 1980, The Dark Side of the Moon. We've been talking a lot over the last 6, 7, 8 months about Pink Floyd. The Dark Side of the Moon recorded its 303rd week on the U.S. album chart, which set a new record, beating Carole King's Tapestry. Now, of course, Billboard screws things up as they are wont to do. So they changed their album chart. They moved Pink Floyd, Dark Side of the Moon, from eligibility on the regular top 200 albums. They had a pop catalog chart for a while, and then they said, no, we screwed up. We'll go ahead and let those albums move back into the regular top 200. So again, on this day in 1980, The Dark Side of the Moon sets the record for most weeks on the US album chart with 303. But right now, as of January of 2024, Dark Side of the Moon has clocked 988 weeks on the US album chart, according to Billboard. On this day, March the 29th, 1975, one of the catchiest songs of all time. And I remember listening to this song on WLS AM out of Chicago. That should date me. That should tell you where I live, where I'm from, where I grew up. The great WLS out of Chicago. Voulez-vous coucher à mes soirs? I can't do French. I'm sorry. I'm bad enough when it comes to singing, let alone trying to sing French. La Belle. Lady Marmalade was the number one U.S. single on this day in 1975. And then wrapping up anniversaries. March the 29th, 1973, Destiny. It had to be Destiny, right? After having a hit song singing about being on the cover of the Rolling Stone, Dr. Hook and the Medicine Show actually appear on the cover of Rolling Stone magazine on this day in 1973. Moving on to birthdays. March the 29th, 1959, leader of Jane's Addiction and Porno for Pyros, Perry Farrell was born. One of my guilty pleasure bands. Lead singer Bobby Kimball, born on this day, March 29th, 1947. That would be Toto. Love Toto. Love Toto. Now, Bobby Kimball, of course, sang on a lot of their early hits, especially their first big hit, Hold the Line. March the 29th, 1946. Birthday of Terry Jacks. Now, Terry Jacks, unfortunately, is going to go down in infamy on the downside of music history. In my opinion, he just got those irritating songs that nobody likes. You Light Up My Life, Open Arms, Can't Fight This Feeling. Terry Jacks with a song that was rejected by the Beach Boys. He decided to record it himself. It became a big hit, and the world was worse off for it. Of course, Terry Jacks with the big hit. We had joy, we had fun, we had seasons in the sun. Terry Jacks, born on this day in 1946. March 29th, 1943, Chad Allen. Not normally associated with the Guess Who, but technically one of the founding members of the band. Unfortunately, as is so often the case, he set the foundation for the band. People moved out, people moved in. He got shoved out, or he decided to quit before they really took off. So one of the quote unquote founding members of the Guess Who, Chad Allen, born on this day in 1943. And then finally, to wrap up, I Want to Go Back. You know the song, you hate the song. One of those rare few instrumentals that was a big hit. But again, back in the 80s, anything went. Rock and roll, soul, R&B, hip hop, disco, cheesy instrumentals from movies, it did not matter. Born on this day, March the 29th, 1943, same as Chad Allen of the Guess Who. Long, long name, but we know him as Vangelis. Of course, I am talking about his big hit, the theme from Chariots of Fire, the Oscar-winning movie of the same name. And that's going to do it for I Want to Go Back. Segment 3 is done, but you know we are not done yet. One more quick break, one last segment. We've gone into the past. We've looked at the present. Now it's time to go into the future and discuss what new music we're going to be talking about here in the coming weeks on the Fortress of Rock. I'm the Maestro Kevin Crane. I will be back in 60 seconds. Well, we hope you enjoyed our trip back in time, looking back at the anniversaries, the classic moments in rock and roll history. But of course, the DeLorean works both ways. So now we have to move forward. The last segment here, as always, on the Fortress of Rock with me, the Maestro Kevin Crane. Spotify, Anchor, Apple, Stitcher, Castbox, Google, Pocket Casts, Radio Public, wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. It's all about the future. What's coming out here in the next month or two? What songs? What albums? What concert tours? That's why we call it Wrap It Up. Thanks to the fabulous Thunderbirds. Thanks to you for hanging out. Here comes our final segment. All right, everybody, welcome back. The fourth and final segment here on March the 29th, 2024, episode 137 of the Fortress of Rock is, of course, Wrap It Up, our tribute to the fabulous Thunderbirds, where we look ahead, give you a preview of what we're going to talk about in the next week or two, the next month, when it comes to concerts, new albums, and new songs. And, of course, let's start off with our new feature, our tribute to, yes, I just disparaged the Billboard charts, which I will do, because I think they screwed everything up in the early 90s, but back when I was a kid, with America's Top 40 and Casey Kasem, reading the Billboard magazine in the grocery store every week, that's where I grew to love music. So, we have decided to add in the Fortress of Rock's number one album of the week and our top songs of the week. For the second week in a row, our number one album is Happiness Bastards by the Black Crowes. I'm telling you, it is a phenomenal album. If you have not listened to it, checked it out yet, you have got to listen to this. A stellar comeback effort from the Black Crowes. Top songs. Last week, we reviewed Sebastian Bach and Everybody Bleeds. That is one of our top songs of the week here this week. Great song from the former lead singer, possibly future, maybe, if they mend fences. Lead singer of Skid Row. So Everybody Bleeds, and let's go with another song from Happiness Bastards. Let's go with the leadoff track, Bedside Manners, from the Black Crowes. So number one album, Happiness Bastards, Black Crowes. Number one songs, Everybody Bleeds, Sebastian Bach, and Bedside Manners by the Black Crowes. Next month or so, next 4 weeks, coming up here on the Fortress of Rock, album reviews. Not quite to the point where we've got concerts yet. Getting close, getting very close. But next week, we will finally review The Other Side of Mars, the first solo album from former Motley Crue guitarist Mick Mars, episode 138 on April the 5th. In 2 weeks, it's the Mandrake Project from Iron Maiden lead singer Bruce Dickinson. That will be 139, episode 139 on April the 12th. Then we get into the stuff that we're really looking forward to. In 3 weeks, One Deep River from the great Mark Knopfler, one of my top 3 guitarists of all time. That is episode 140 on April the 19th. And then in 4 weeks, episode 141 on April the 26th, Dark Matter, supposedly a return to form. Old school 90s grunge rock from Pearl Jam. Dark Matter on April the 26th. Then, of course, we've got Sebastian Bach in the offing, Collective Soul with their double album, Kings of Leon. So we have plenty of albums each and every week. A new album review for you here on the Fortress of Rock. As far as new songs are concerned, next week we will have the second single from Dark Matter, Pearl Jam's Running. That will be 100% for sure, definitely on the docket here on the Fortress of Rock, episode 138 next week. We're still looking at reviewing The Effect. We've talked about that band. We've talked about the pedigree in The Effect. The son of Steve Lukather of Toto and the son of Phil Collins. Toxic Envy. They've got a couple songs out, but we're going to focus on Toxic Envy for you. Should be next week here on the Fortress of Rock. Now, a couple songs that just popped here today on March the 29th. This will probably be the last single we get from One Deep River from Mark Knopfler before the full album review. Again, coming up in 3 weeks. Third single from One Deep River is Two Pairs of Hands. I've listened to it, little sneak preview. I am very, very happy, very encouraged by what I'm hearing from this album. Sounds like he is going not all the way back. Again, you can never replicate the group dynamic, but he sounds like he's kind of trying to go back to a little bit more of the whole Dire Straits sound and feel. So Two Pairs of Hands. In the next week or two, we'll have that for you here on the Fortress of Rock. And then finally, we knew this was coming, the second single after Mustang from Kings of Leon. New album coming here in the next month or two. Second single is Split Screen. New album is Can We Just Have Fun? I love that title. But again, the second single is Split Screen. Again, I have already kind of done a little preview for you. Listen to it. Kings of Leon is very, very underrated. They are very underrated when it comes to how they can change as a band, the texture. Split Screen is very interesting. It almost sounds to me on first listen like something you would get from an 80s era Cars or Police. Now, maybe I'm overstating it. Let me listen to it a few more times. Again, that's just a preview, little sample, little taste for you on one listen of what I'm hearing from the Kings of Leon and Split Screen. But that's going to do it for the Fortress of Rock here on March the 29th. The weather's getting better. We're heading into spring, barreling on into summer. Of course, obviously, the best time of the year, not only for weather, but for music, concerts. The best time of the year to be with the one you love. Love the one you're with. You are who you are. I am the Maestro, Kevin Crane. As always, very appreciative, very happy, and glad that you hang out with me every Friday night for this rock and roll extravaganza we call the Fortress of Rock. I will talk to you again in 7 days. Until then, Take care of yourselves. Don't drink and drive. Be happy, be safe, be peaceful. Don't stress out. Don't worry. Don't let the man bring you down. Peace out, kids.